Welcome to Fierce Compassion Podcast. My name is Brett William Simpson and I'm your host. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, if you're second on your own priority list and you're seeking a little bit of self-compassion and self-love, if you're looking to build resilience emotionally, mentally, physically, and even spiritually, then this is the podcast for you. I'm a spontaneous remission cancer survivor, and over the past 13 years, I've learned why some people pass from cancer and while others with the same diagnosis, with the same prognosis, end up living these amazing and fulfilling lives. So I tend to use very big words now: psychoneuroimmunology, epigenetics, neuroplasticity, to sound very clever, but more so to really explain and demystify the magic, or actually the science, of what really feeds our health and what starves disease. So Fierce Compassion Podcast shows up people who have wisdom in compassion, in healing, and in being fully human. So if you're willing and capable of taking responsibility for your healing and life, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to Fierce Compassion Podcast, episode 6. And today I have an amazing and humbling conversation with an ex-colleague and friend of mine, Unathi Kapa. Unathi is one of those very unique human beings who has deep integration between her IQ as well as her EQ. She is currently the General Manager of PLWC, or People Living with Cancer, where I had the privilege of working with her for nearly 3 years. Her incredible eye for detail, the accuracy of her financial management, and her human resource skills were all honed as a pre-teen in her parents' general store in the rural Eastern Cape. Unathi is also a blogger and a musician, which are two channels for her personal expression. So why the conversation with Unathi? Unathi and I are both South Africans raised in the Eastern Cape, but our experiences in our upbringing are completely different from a black female South African to a white male South African. So in this conversation, we cover our differences, our beliefs, racism, spirituality, questioning of those beliefs, and what it truly means to witness one another without judgment. Unathi and I have a very clear motivation and intent for this podcast, and we really hope that it meets that, because it is really for us to start a conversation that we might, as South Africans and as people in the entire world, to be able to truly see one another without judgment, without prejudice. So I really hope this aims to achieve that intent, and I hope that it resonates with you. Unathi Kapa, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It is incredibly meaningful for me that we can have a discussion today around a sensitive topic like race, brought on, I think, by, at least for me, around what's happened with lockdown, that it's quietened everything down. It's almost like this noise has quietened down around our lives, around my life. So let me speak, because let me speak truthfully about my perspective and not make assumptions about anybody else. So what lockdown did for me is that it kind of quietened everything down around me, and suddenly my behavior and the world and where it is has suddenly started to become quite clear and sad as well, because there's been so much that has come up that is uncomfortable around how I believe we have jointly created this world, patriarchally with a white man at the forefront, but we've created a world that is just, there's so many prejudices built into it. There's discrimination against every single aspect, from color to sexual orientation to gender to and it's like through lockdown, it's really kind of, it's hit me square between the eyes. And as this lockdown has come, the rise of Black Lives Matter, and it is something that I have been really humbled in. I've had conversations with you, and you are somebody who I trust very deeply. You've educated me. You've been very gentle. The way that you show up is with compassion first, and this fierce heart behind it, with a very powerful mind. So you're one of those sorts of people who has got this incredible intellect with an incredible heart that sits within it. So my conversations with you have always been food for thought. I've always walked away from them with just like this awe of like, oof, my perspective is not the only one. And this truth around, like, I've really got to open myself up to other people's perspective. And this is really why this conversation is so, so important to me, because I watched 13th, which is a documentary on racism and the institution of prisons, and the intention, if you can call it, the intentionality of racism built into almost like a modern day slavery. And it left me very quiet for about half an hour afterwards. Myself and my partner watched it, and it left me quite sick to my stomach that Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and Bill Clinton were intentional around what they did around racism in America. Then I take that back to South Africa, and we're in, as I feel it, we're still in a very deep hangover of apartheid that has not. The Truth and Reconciliation was amazing, but it never got implemented in the orders and the agreements that happened during the course of that. So for me at the moment, I'm very curious around a white guy sitting on this side and realizing with what I've learned in the last 5 years with this consciousness rising in me, with what's happened with lockdown, with me watching Black Lives Matter, and the amazing conversations that you have gently held me and educated me, and not with hurt or hate, but with compassion, which is, again, the reason why I want to chat to you, because it's so meaningful for me that I can have a tough conversation around a theme that scares the daylights out of me, but being held with compassion, which is how you communicate. It's how you show up in the world. It's how I've always seen you represent yourself in the world. So I don't know where to start. I'm nervous and anxious. So Unathi, opening thoughts, as it were.
All right. Oh my goodness. Well, you started already. That was a very, very proper introduction, and opening the floor for both of us in terms of what this conversation is about, because that's what it is. It's a conversation. It's not it's not a political discussion, first of all, although we are both interested in politics. And it's also not your grand philosophical, full of terminology that the average person on the street cannot even make sense of at times, because I believe that in the conversations that I've seen around race, for example, especially on platforms such as these, because I do understand that this is going to reach a lot of people, online, and various platforms where you're going to broadcast this will enable other people in other parts of the world to see this. But the conversations that I've come across on your YouTube or wherever else, or with your TED Talks, I find that after watching that, I sit back and think to myself, can the average person on the street understand this conversation? It may land well with myself as an educated, middle class Black woman who can converse in English and can make sense of that kind of dialogue. But what do we want to achieve ultimately with these discussions and conversations? And I was thinking while preparing for our own chat, I thought to myself, my goodness, do we need another, a typical discussion or discourse between your Black and Black, respondents, whatever the case may be? Or what is unique about this particular conversation that we're having, and why do we need to have it? Because we've had these chats together, in the context of a PLWC where we met, and the gentleness that you make mention of from my side, I experienced from you. And I think that's what enabled both of us to be able to meet each other at a heart level beyond just the brain. So it went from just being colleagues to being two human beings who were faced with similar human issues related to race, related to love. We've spoken extensively about the things that touch us all as human beings. And I think that's been our common place of relatability. I know that you're deeply spiritual, and so am I. But we also give each other room to differ. And I think what usually becomes a challenge in such discussions is that everybody wants to be right at the same time. Of course, there are fundamentals where there are things that are not on the table for discussion. Is your life, more valuable than mine? Never ever. It's not even on the table for discussion with me when I'm discussing such issues. But now, what I like to delve into are the heart matters. I want to know, why is it scary, for example, for you as a white man to speak on race, which is something that in South Africa has informed so much of our existence. I was born in apartheid South Africa. I was born in the 1980s. All of my childhood was spent during that time in a village somewhere in the Eastern Cape, where I really didn't know that we existed at a time when the political landscape beyond our own insulated existence was so heated. I didn't know what the average black child in a township in South Africa was experiencing during that time. It was totally different to my own existence as a child who grew up in a village. And also because I had parents who intentionally wanted to sort of shield us from that. I'm not sure why, because I've never asked them, but in my home, we never had political discussions. That never, ever. My mom was a proponent of go to school, get your education. It was never mentioned that it was Bantu education or that it was inferior to the kind of education that the white child was receiving, at the schools at the time. But she felt strongly that if she could just get her children educated, they would eventually be on par, with your average maybe Model C going, child who lived maybe in your Queenstown, your East London, or whatever the case may have been at that time in terms of our own immediate surroundings and environment. So I did not grow up around adults who discussed politics, but I grew up around people who valued education immensely. And strange enough, it is education that actually brought me to spaces where I got to be educated now about the politics around our existence. And I finally got to know, my word, you mean there are people who have a problem with my skin, where you think that you are, superior to me simply because I'm of a browner hue than you, or because my hair is, it's coarse, it's not silky, it doesn't flow down my back, and you think that's what makes me a lesser human being than you. I must say, I found it hilarious and ludicrous initially, because the foundation had been set for me as a child that I was valuable. You couldn't do or say anything to me that would make me feel lesser than the human being that I believed was valuable. And if I'm going to take it to the spiritual, made in the image of God, because we were raised to go to church, so we were quite, I'm going to say, indoctrinated to a point where you couldn't convince me at any point in my life that anybody who looked different from me was a better human being, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what brought me to this conversation with you is that background, but also because when we met, I thought, this is a human being who recognizes me as a human being worthy of being not only listened to, but you value my opinion, you value the conversations that we have, like this one. It's not a matter of, it looks it looks good to, let's say this was for business purposes, that it would look good on a BEE scorecard or anything like that. It's a human conversation. And that is why I agreed to do this. And we can unpack it in terms of what the lockdown has brought us to and what Black Lives Matter, means for all of us at this time. But the reason why I wanted to go back there is so that we can have an understanding of what brings us to the places that we occupy now, because people are shaped by environments. We are shaped in our homes. And I'm going to make mention of the late Nelson Mandela's quote that nobody is born, hating another human being. We are somehow shaped by the environments in which we grow up. Our children do not just become, racist people. Somebody had some kind of influence on the child, whether it's in the home or beyond. But these things have a foundation. Hence, I gave a little bit of background on my own home and where I came from, and that kind of background as well.
Unathi, thank you for that, and thank you also for, I suppose, thank you for the education that you've given me in the conversations that we've had, because we worked on a campaign which was around, and I think this is where, just to highlight, I suppose, a point around Black Lives Matter. So when we were trying to communicate to all South Africans around the hope that is in support with cancer. So that was our mission at Cancer Buddies and people living with cancer to some degree. And so I wrote a program, and it was wonderful in English. And then we're like, okay, cool. So let's have a conversation around Xhosa community. We've got 11 official languages in the country, and we're going, okay, from English to Xhosa. And you basically educated me on the stigmas that are involved in the culture of Xhosa speaking communities around cancer. It's very different. It's a very different kind of cultural bias that starts to come in, or perspective that comes around cancer. And that understanding made me realize that if that's just in the cancer space, then what else am I making assumptions about for anything that I do or show up in a way that is going to be have possibly a different stigma in it. And again, we're speaking about two different languages in South Africa, English and Xhosa, and there's 11 official languages, and there's more languages than that in South Africa. So there's different perspectives around everything. And I suppose for me, the core of what I'm trying to achieve here is just to look at things from different perspectives. Like, my hope is that people who I hold very close in my heart might look at this and have a different shift around it, just like I did. And I'm going to go into something, I know I'm jumping around here, but it'll make sense in a little bit of a segue. So during the last 2 or 3 weeks, I had a moment where something came out, and it was emotionally hard for me. It was essentially me understanding two different kind of, I suppose, trauma. As a young person, as an infant and a young person, I had these memories, and there was these stories that I created around that, and then belief systems built around that. And then suddenly these belief systems started to wobble, and I questioned them, and all of this emotion came out. And I went through this whole process and realized that this my victim mode of kind of showing up, or my way of feeling sorry for myself, was actually a little bit of a manipulative tool that I used to get what I wanted when I was an infant. But then I started to build on that, and that was based on some formative experiences that I had in my mind that went like this. I then had a conversation with my mom around this, and she told me that I had actually, a different thing had happened to my memory of that. But what was interesting, Unathi, is that my memory of that built belief systems and emotional
Yeah.
ways of reacting and ways of basically of hurt that then controlled the way that I showed up in the world after that. So then
Yes.
I took a step back from the situation and I went, wow. So I had trauma as a child, very privileged, very, very privileged. Trauma as a
Mm.
child that I embellished, that wasn't really trauma, but that I embellished to create trauma. And suddenly
Mm.
I had to go through illegitimate trauma in my life and let it go and feel all the emotions and feel whatever I needed to feel. And yet it was illegitimate. And I hope I'm
Mm.
articulating quite well, because it wasn't real. It was fabricated. And this amazes me with the power of the mind. Then I watched 13th, and it made me, and again, I'm getting back to that now. So this different perspective that I'm trying to, I suppose, make room for here. In that I
Mm.
looked at 13th, and it's in America. It's not even in South Africa. We're a part. We were and are in the hangover of apartheid. But I look at
Mm.
America and I just go like, wow, these leaders were intentional about a race-related kind of discrimination that was built into the system of the US. And it was mind-blowing for me. So
Mm.
through that, I think I've come, and then I look at South Africa, and my question to you, Unathi, is like, I'm at a loss for words when it comes for what to do, how to show up, and how to heal racial injustices of the past. Because what I realized is that a mantra is becoming quite true for me, and that is, it is not my fault, but it is my responsibility to shift things to a more equal opportunity environment in my community, in my relationships, in who I deal with, and I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. And I realize at the moment that I need to shut up and learn and listen. And that's what I realize is my job for me, and my discomfort with racial prejudice, with gender prejudice, with so much that's going on. But let's kind of stick to Black Lives Matter and what it means. Can I ask you to just comment on what I've spoken into, and what maybe your perspective is of Black Lives Matter, around your life experience of
Mm.
growing up in Eastern Cape and within the stronghold of apartheid that we grew up in?
Wow. Um, well, firstly, I must commend you for always being so introspective, because this is what I've come to know of you, Brett, that you're not scared of going to the scary places, if I may put it as such, inside yourself, to dig deep and actually arrive at, whether you arrive at a conclusion or it starts you on a path or a process where you are seeking to arrive at a place where you can say, ah, there's the light, that's what I need to do. And I'm not surprised at all that this is the process that has unfolded inside of yourself, that you've identified this and you're like, I fabricated this trauma, I built on it, I embellished it, so that it could serve me, and that went even beyond my childhood. Because I think for a lot of us, when we have childhood experiences, be they traumas, be they real or not, we do sometimes use them as, I'm going to say, crutches that aid us, and we think they're working well for us in life when actually they're not, because they are keeping us from the freedom that you're now beginning to experience. Because once you let that go, you begin to see things as they are and not as you had fabricated them to be, which liberates you to become a better version of yourself. Because I think for people like yourself and I, who are constantly seeking to come to a higher consciousness of our existence as human beings, we're not satisfied with the mundane, or we're not satisfied to just accept things as they are, be they our own idiosyncrasies, or just systems that have been constructed either to our benefit or to our detriment. Because I'm going to touch now on 13th, which I also watched, because when you spoke to me about it, I didn't know of the documentary at the time. And then I just made it my mission, to watch it and see what it's about. And I was also, taken aback because I must say I was ignorant of the construction, the precise and intentional mission from the U.S. government. And you've mentioned the three presidents who were key in ensuring that they had that kind of established criminal justice system that would ensure that I'm going to say black men in this case, ended up providing them with cheap labor, so that they could continue to sustain and maintain their economic, gains for the different companies that contributed towards that as well. Because one discovers through that documentary that it's actually it's a heavily funded machine. That a lot of people on the street don't know this because people want justice. When crimes are committed, be they shoplifting, which we may say is petty crime, or where somebody is murdered, people are always crying for justice. But even beyond America, people don't know that there are agendas behind these systems. These systems don't just exist for our good because people want to protect us, but these are structures that have been strategically built to serve another agenda that we may not be privy to at first glance until your 13th and other documentaries that have come to light. When They See Us, for example, also a US documentary, which opened my eyes to what I already suspected, that the criminal justice system is flawed in some respects, and also that it's not our savior. We're always thinking, if the police can get hold of this person, our problems will be over. Our streets, will be clean. We will not have drugs and the rest of it. But unaware that there are other powers that be that, are seeking other ends. And this is the means to that end. So when you say to me, what does all this mean to me personally, as a first black girl and then a black woman, living now in 2020, I cannot escape the fact that I exist in this system where there was a time when I was growing up in the Eastern Cape, for example, where you would see a white man driving a buggy. We both know what a buggy is, but a van without a canopy, if I may, for the benefit of someone who doesn't know what a buggy is. And this man, most likely a farmer, would be driving this buggy, and one of his workers, or maybe more than one of his workers, would be sitting at the back, and the dog would be sitting in the passenger seat. The farmer's dog, yes. So that was a common picture in the Eastern Cape while I was growing up. Now, I also had parents who owned a shop, a very successful and vibrant shop in a rural context of the time, who was serving not only our home village, but other villages around us. So it was thriving for that reason, because there was no, this was before 1994, so freedom of movement was not quite a thing yet. So the people around us relied on my parents and other shopkeepers, in that area, to bring them food items, and essentials from our nearest town. So my parents had these trucks and, buggies as well, and and sedans that they owned over the years. So it was that kind of a family. So I would be driving with my parents, whether it's just myself and my parents, or my siblings and cousins and my parents, and we drive past, a farmer or whoever, this white man in this buggy alone, and the other person sitting at the back, and sometimes it's raining. So that, to me as a child, although nobody ever explained it, I thought there was something wrong with that.
Sure.
Nobody ever said to me this is racism and this is what's happening here. So I'm going to come to the human heart. What it means to me at this time to have a movement like Black Lives Matter is not only to adjust the structural or the architecture that has ensured that white lives, or I'm going to say privilege rather, as relating to race and whiteness is, upheld and protected, because this thing must not crumble because it comes with power, particularly economic power, which we both know once you have that power, you can wield it whichever way. With economic power, you can control politics. I mean, you can fund politicians so that policies can be slanted towards your wishes.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of power that you want. So at this time, for me, what really has warmed my heart is how people of all hues have come out with one voice saying this has got to end. Black Lives Matter. It's no longer just Black people on the streets protesting. It's no longer just Black people camping out and saying it's enough, especially in other parts of the world. But it's people across the board, because I will say you can legislate against structures. You can legislate, to say in a South African context, for example, you need to have such a percentage, of Black people in your company in leadership positions so that you can get the BEE points. You can do that, but you can't legislate against the heart. The heart is something that, for some reason, we can study the heart as much as we like. We will never quite understand it, just like we continue to study love. It's still like, what is this thing? And I don't know what it is that sparks a nerve, in all of us collectively when it comes to certain things, whereas in others we will be at pains to explain or dispute, if you feel, the opposite on such matters, where you have to explain what race is, first of all, and then you have to explain what racism is, and you have to explain why you think it exists, because now it's as if it's a figment of your imagination, because it's difficult to face something that has benefited you and to have to say, yes, I am a beneficiary of racism. I am privileged. I've had to explain to some white friends why it is that they have a white privilege,
No, but
because
Unathi, it took me a while, and I was supported by an amazing woman, Fiona Wallace, and a friend, and a really close friend of mine, Tessa Boss. They both, over a period of time, and you mention heart, and you mention, and that is so important. They had the heart and the patience with me to take me on a journey slowly but surely that helped me understand privilege. And at first I was like, no. What do you mean privilege? Like, you've just got the same abilities that I do, and you're a human, and everything. And then slowly but surely, kind of it sunk in. I was like, shit, like, my dad and my mom are together. That's privilege. My dad benefited from the day of creating his company. He did it from scratch, but like, he had the privilege of his white skin, of his connections, of all it, and then the privilege just stacks up and up and up and up. But it also takes, like, and this is the juicy part for me as well. Like, Unathi, is like, how do we educate white people on privilege, but do it in a way that they can hear it?
That I can hear it. All right.
So please continue with what you were saying, because I don't want to interrupt that. Because your thought was, you were speaking about your friends and explaining about white privilege.
Yes, and those are very important conversations to have for me. I think a lot of change will actually happen on the ground, when we're breaking bread with friends, and you hear this a lot when you have white people who will say, "But I have Black friends. I'm not racist. I have Black friends," because they have Unathi,
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's got a Black friend with you, Unathi.
Yeah. But I always think to myself, first of all, if I, as a Black person, am able to access resources which are so readily available online, where this subject has been thrashed out so many times, by various people. If people want to really educate themselves, they don't really have to go far, even from just their phone. You go to YouTube, you search for, conversations or discussions or talks or presentations, which are available, easily accessible as well. It doesn't have to be Black people who have to educate white people about whiteness and why privilege is something that they should take stock of personally. And by this, it's not because I'm saying that when we have a conversation like this one, for example, I should just say, nope, Brett, there's plenty of information available online. Go find it. We should be open to these conversations, I feel, because if humanity is to progress, we need to really have honest and open dialogue, put our on the table, and thresh things out. What I normally am not a huge proponent of is when Black people must be the ones who do the work. Go do as in, we must make it easy to understand. It's not an easy subject. It's not supposed to be. It's built on pain. The system is built on pain. It's built on, prejudice. Imagine having to relive that trauma every time by explaining to somebody over and over, this is how it feels. This is what it means. This is how I've experienced it. And it's like, and I'm in no way saying that the two are alike, but imagine a victim of molestation, for example, having to be asked, and we've seen this, for example, in one of the big cases that we've seen broadcast here in South Africa, where there was some. Well, this is still ongoing, a trial on this person who molested girls and all of that, a church leader, and seeing this one particular woman on the stand being asked tough questions that were so invasive, for all to hear as to what it is that this man had actually done. Now, these are two different scenarios, but they are both about trauma. You're
Yes.
asking Black people to over and over and over again perform, and actually be kind about it. That's another thing. It's like, by the way, you had better be kind while you're doing it. I don't care how much hurt you are about the experiences we've gone through as an individual or as a collective, but make it easy on us. Make it easy on us, will you? And I'm thinking to myself, is why is it that we are called upon, as Black people overall, to educate, white people about something that I would think is so, it is so, it's obvious, that this is wrong. This is something that needs to change. Now it's the how that we can obviously, engage on and say, how do we go about doing this? I've already mentioned one way, and it is these kinds of conversations. The conversation we're having right now is not something that you see every day, even online in the South African context. We find that we always have to refer to your American dramas, American documentaries. Even the Black Lives Matter movement was started because of experiences in America related to the cops that were killing Black people in America, and now recently because of George Floyd, who whose murder was recorded, and because it was caught on camera and everybody in the world could now see this, now the world was like, wait a minute, this is unacceptable. But I feel that it's on the ground, as I said before, that people need to have heart to heart conversations. It's not enough to say, I don't know enough. But have you ever just had a conversation beyond having a conversation with the people you feel comfortable with?
Yeah.
Have you ever just sat with your, I'm going to say, your street vendor in South Africa, to say, I just want to to have a conversation. I just want to sit, not as a social experiment, but as a human being. Even if that conversation will never see the light of day on your social media or the rest of it, just having private conversations with people around us. And South African people are very open. If you approach them with the right attitude and the right mindset, they will engage you. They will take you in. And yes, we know there's crime. So when people say, "I can't go to the townships, there's crime," of course there's crime. But would you not, if you're really, really, are intentional and are really, you really mean it when you say, "I want to know how I can make a difference," then you go to the people that you want to make a difference to, not as a charity exercise. And I say this as somebody who's in the charity space,
No, I
which
agree.
you've
Yeah.
not because you feel like you're going to be a white savior,
Yeah.
because you think there's a lot to be
There's that
fixed.
too. Yeah, I'm gonna heal. I'm gonna help. I'm gonna make the difference.
The redeemer. No, you are here just because you are now dealing with the issue that concerns your heart. You are not relying on, because it's easy to tell somebody, that the dangling the carrot in front of all of us, saying, "If you do this, you're gonna get that." You hire so many black people, there's your isco.
Yeah.
When there's nothing in it for you except just to connect with another human being for the sake of our health as well, Brett, because you and I care deeply about the subject of health and wellness and vitality and what contributes to that. And I don't think that we realize that hate makes you sick. Hate sickens
Beautiful.
you, and then it just seeps out of you, and it's poisonous to those around you. It's poisonous to your own relationships that you think are the safe ones from those people, which we hear a lot. These people. I learned very late that when people are saying these people, they mean black people. Because I was thinking, oh, who are these people?
Yeah, no, but it is amazing as well. Like
Yes.
when you hear that sort of stuff, and a year ago, 2, 4, 5 years ago, like that, I'd hear that, but now I hear it very differently, and it's
Very differently.
yeah, it's yeah, it comes with a bucket of shame and like it's just a sad heart, like why, how have we gotten to this point? After,
Point.
I mean, I shared something on social media the other day. It was a teacher in a 1950s scenario, and she basically was teaching these little ones what discrimination is. So she treated the blue-eyed kids poorly, and she treated the brown-eyed kids better. And eventually, this infighting started between them. And eventually, she brought it back to the example. It's just, I'm just trying to explain to you how discrimination is hurtful, painful for both parties, and how wrong it is. And then in 1992, this amazing woman did it on an Oprah Winfrey show when she actually did it with the guests. And it was so fascinating, because even when the charade or the blue-eyed people were outed, and they said, we're doing an experiment to help you understand discrimination, and the arguments that happened after that point were, you could see the penny hadn't dropped. And it was so fascinating that in the 50s, before the 50s, like this people have been having conversations trying to kind of bring this out into awareness, and then it's happened so many times, and then now suddenly, like, with this quietness of the shutdown and George Floyd, and now suddenly it's again coming up.
And it robs, I feel like if you live your entire life in fear of getting to know somebody of a different skin color, and you only keep to your circles and to that which is familiar. Of course, familiarity can be comfortable, but somebody once said many years ago, I don't know where I heard this, but somebody said a comfort zone is not necessarily a place of comfort. A comfort zone is just a place of familiarity, because you know what to expect in it. but you can be in a comfort zone, and it is not serving you well. It's not a comfortable place to be in, because you'd like to break out of it, but you don't know how. It's a place where you know that if you were to be presented with anything at any day, you know how to navigate that particular space. You know how to work the system. If you've had, I'm going to say, white friends all of your life, and you're suddenly being asked to break out of that and experience something else, it's scary. It's scary, but if you are able to say, okay, I want to challenge myself in other areas of your life, and you do it successfully. You go bungee jumping, you go doing all sorts of things because you want to face the fear and all of that. How about this fear that's preventing you from relating to other human beings in a way that's going to liberate you? You know, you
Unathi,
miss out on so much.
that is incredibly powerful. What you've just said there, it's incredible. I think, as you know, I'm obsessed around like stretching myself and growing and expanding. And what you've said now around, in fact, I watched a Barack Obama interview. I think it was with Trevor Noah, actually, which makes it
All
even
right.
more like profound. He
Yeah.
basically said, and it was so powerful what he said. He said, social media has allowed us to sit and follow people who we agree with exclusively.
Yes.
So we're not,
Yes.
we're all the media that then comes in is everything that it fits with our truth and that doesn't challenge our truth. So and what you've said right now, because I had this conversation actually in a podcast last week around community, and the Karen who challenged me, and she basically said to me, Brett, your network and the people who you connect with, like, great, but how are you growing as a human being if you're not sitting with people having hard conversations about topics that are sensitive?
Right.
How are you not like educating yourself
Yeah.
with people who have got complete, like, I could imagine sitting with somebody who really loves Trump and going, and I don't want to have the conversation, but I should, because they'll probably learn and I'll probably learn. And I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but there's something powerful in that connecting. And I think before this conversation, I saw that as valuable. Now I see it as valuable, because I think what you're saying to me is probably one of the most powerful things that I have control of in opening myself up, and that is to be able to kind of not follow the people who agree to me, not connect with the people who are in my same value system, but to break outside of that, because I think that's where empathy, and that's where you spoke to the heart again. And
Yes.
it's like, for me, the only way that we can do this, we can't do this through, excuse my language, but like, you're an asshole and you're an asshole because of this and you're an asshole, but like just see and just hear and just see somebody else's reality, and compassion and empathy come from there. Like,
That's right.
anyway, that's my
That's right.
monologue, and I just like, that is really beautiful, and honestly, I just really want to honor that, because that lands so powerfully for me around I can watch 13th, but if I don't break out of my social network and my network
Yeah.
outside of that, I'm going to keep myself in this little way of thinking that is very linear.
Yeah. Very linear and very, oh my goodness, and suffocating as well. Because I think once you have a sense of there's something else out there, you suddenly cannot be content with what you've had all along, because you've now caught a glimpse of
Oh.
another possibility. And I think to myself as well, it's challenging to exist in these spaces as a black person where you are surrounded predominantly by white people.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge that if you've lived with it since you were 13 years old, as the case is with me, where I walked into a school where the teachers were all white. There was not one black teacher, and the kids were predominantly white as well. And initially, although this improved over the years, initially we were being told, go back to where you came from. Some of the kids were calling us baboons, all sorts of things. But you have to navigate these spaces, and you are expected to thrive. you are expected to excel in that environment. Now tell me, how do you exist in an environment where you're constantly being told you're inadequate, you're inadequate, you're inadequate, and yet the bar is raised to say you're inadequate, but jump this high. It's an existence that a lot of us as Black, especially those of us who went to these schools just after or just before 1994, experienced this at a level that we couldn't even communicate it to our parents, because our parents thought they were giving us a better life. They're sending their kids to these nice white schools, and their facilities and resources are so much better than what they could be getting either at a village or a township. And they don't know what it is that we faced at these schools. That's why it also breaks my heart at this time, by the way, because this is also something that has come up during this lockdown. It breaks my heart to hear that there are still school kids who are, Black in some of these schools, the private schools or your former Model C schools, where they have the same challenges that we had some 30 years ago, where you look at that and you're like, you mean our children have to deal with that stuff still? And that's why a lot of us in my generation, for example, I'm almost 40 years old. So those of us who are in their 40s or, the mid 30s and the rest, are engaging robustly in these conversations because we have had that experience and we want better for our children. This is not the world we want our children to inherit, where even if the racism is not overt, but these subtleties that can be hidden so well and sometimes clumsily so because they just come through and you're like, my gosh, it's so obvious, can't you see it? We don't want that for our children. And I think this is why even with these conversations and with the Twitter, the Black Twitter conversations, I know that everyone now knows about Black Twitter, and because these are conversations that need to be had and they need to be solutions. It's now a time of, right, what are we going to do about it? It's not enough that we speak about it on social media platforms. It's not enough people want change. And I think this is what this time has brought about. During this lockdown period, there's been a lot of reflection on the state of the world that we have tolerated up until this time. It's almost as if we are becoming impatient, and we have come to a point as humanity where we are not taking that, we are keeping this, and perhaps we need at such a time as this where we can speak on certain issues with one voice. Maybe this pandemic has brought us to a place as humanity where we realize we actually are one. We truly are one. So on all of these matters, we need to rally together. We cannot achieve this just by saying, this is what Black people need to do. This is what white people need to do. And also, Brett, I think it's so important to realize that when you step out there and do whatever it is that you're going to do to, to bring action to your conviction, because it's important to match conviction with action. Otherwise, it's there's no value to it otherwise. When you do that, to also be cognizant of the fact that people are people. Unathi is Black, yes, but she's a human being. She's also flawed in other ways. You might approach somebody and your intentions are so good and they hurt you, and now you suddenly realize, oh, this is not going to work. Don't, keep pushing ahead and because you will have these valuable exchanges and interactions with people. You will find joy. You will also find disappointment. You may be discouraged, but also just as you wake up every day after you've had similar experiences in your existing circle, you don't just give up on life. You don't give up on people as a whole. You realize, okay, I've had issues with that particular person. And then you see how to tackle that differently with other people. Or even if it means that particular relationship you terminate, or if it's redeemable, you see how to redeem it. So it's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be easy. And there is no template. There's no template because we're humans. We are humaning, but as I said right from the beginning, there are things that are not debatable. The value of another human being when standing next to another human being, we cannot be debating that any longer. But it's these layers that we need to peel. We need to peel these layers um, and come to how is it that a child who is raised by, let's say, the ladies that here in South Africa we have this a lot, where the domestic workers are predominantly black women, and they help and they become part of these families where they put the white baby on their back,
Yeah, I was
and
raised
this
like that.
becomes
I was raised like that.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So we need to determine at what point does the same child who has experienced this at some point in their life begin to fear the person who looks like that
Oh,
very same person
yes, it's
that
Unathi.
carries them on their back. Where did that come from?
Oh,
And it also
oh,
means that it also means that's how you challenge your fear. Because now you present it with the truth, because that's fears are somebody once said fear is false evidence appearing real. It's something that I've heard a lot. So it's false evidence saying that these people are going to hurt you, they're going to harm you. But why will they harm you? You challenge that. You say, so and so carried me on my back. I When my parents were at work or whatever the case may be, this was my place of comfort. I have friends who say to me sometimes, please make me sampan beans because so and so, who was a helper at my home when I was growing up, used to cook that for me, and I want it done that way. I can make it myself, but I want it done that way. These are the human stories. Of course, it's another conversation, the issue of why black women are domestic workers and all of that. That's another conversation altogether. But why is it that that kind of relationship can happen so sincerely as well? Because
mm.
it's
Yeah.
reciprocated, purely and genuinely, and then suddenly it flips. Somewhere at some stage, something changes, and that's what we need to address.
Yo, Anati, there's a lot that you've spoken to that is yeah, I suppose just on the last part of what you said, when you mentioned when you've got kids that go to, like when you went to school around, you you're essentially told you're not worthy, and then the bar is raised.
That's
And
right.
in the work that you and I are so acutely aware of around health and well-being and wellness, around the psychology of that and how subconscious mind will then attach that, create a truth, and grow a belief system around that unworthiness.
Right.
So, I look at the work that I do, and a lot of the support that I have to do for people, like there's shifts in diet, there's shifts in ways of thinking, there's shifts in ways of feeling, and it's a deprogramming of that needs to happen first. Firstly, there needs to be
Right.
an honoring. So in the
Yeah.
honoring, in the context of this, I think for the first time, well, not for the first time, I'm starting to really understand that it needs to be acknowledged. Number one, the most important part of what's going on for Black Lives Matter, it needs to be acknowledged and
Right.
looked into and understood. And the second thing is that, and I don't have the answers for this,
Mm.
if I were to draw a metaphor from the people that I'm working with in the cancer space who moving to wellness, is there has to be this deprogramming of that person in a very compassionately held space over a period of time, but with intention.
With intention,
And
yes.
and that is a life journey. So I suppose my heart is both happy in having this conversation, but sad and daunted at the prospect of how, when I know those belief systems are unraveling at the moment, um, how do we intentionally create that environment for people who are willing? How do we move people along that? How do we I mean, I know the answer to this. I need to do it for myself. I can't control anybody else, and I need to go on this detangling of like small racial quirks and big segregation and just there's so much that I can't think of a clear example right now, but it's but for me everything has to happen, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you, is around the heart has to be involved in this thing the whole way.
Yes.
Because at the moment I'm going through a process of deep shame around watching 13th and everything else that I'm exposing myself to and having these conversations, and just sitting there going like, I'm struggling to digest what I know is true, and I'm having to take a bit of time, but it's just, yeah, I've talked myself into a bit of a corner here, because it's just how do we do it? How do we and like you said, how do we expect Black people to, be the educators in this? Like, that's bullshit. And then how do we, like in our school systems, in our work environments, in our politics, in everything, how do we start building this into that as well, but with intention? Because without intention, we become sheep. And my personal belief is that we've become sheep to the way of the world, and this is what's getting us in this situation. We need to like stand up and go, okay, well, how do we intentionally start to shift ourselves? And for that, I have no answer. I have questions.
Question. From in terms of what to do, obviously the deconstructing of these deeply held beliefs that have been, established. They are rooted now. They're there. It takes effort, and I think also, Brett, if we are willing to invest so much in, you and I believe in therapy.
Yes,
we believe so much in therapy. Yes, and you actually pay for it. You pay somebody to help you navigate life as a whole, your own personal life, whatever it is that you may be dealing with at that particular point. Why is it that when it comes to this particular, challenge that we have, we must be equally challenged and also encouraged to seek the answers, to say, I'm not going to be satisfied with not knowing what to do. I'm going to find the answers. I'm going to go to the places that will most likely provide me with answers. It possibly will not be a once-off thing, because this is a human exercise. These are systems that have been in place for, hundreds of years, and they may manifest differently at different times because they mutate, but it's still the same foundation that they built on. Of one race or one, yes, I'm going to say one race being superior to the other, although we know we're all the human race. But if we are willing to do the work, I think the answers can be found, and I don't think there's any mystique. It's challenging, and when things are challenging, it seems like you will never be able to surmount the challenge, because it's a huge mountain that you need to climb, and you think you have to climb it alone. But I think there should be comfort in the fact that this is a collective exercise as much as it is an individual exercise. And how comforting is it that a lot of the groundwork has already been done? A lot of people have been speaking to this for years and years and years. It's a matter of accessing those resources that are readily available, reading. If you really feel like, I need somebody to coach me on this, I need guidance, then you go and read up on it. You go and find these videos online where these things are being addressed, and take what is applicable to you and apply that in your day-to-day life, and be intentional about it. Even if it means once a week, or however many times a week, I want to dedicate this amount of time to this exercise, because you want to achieve a certain end. Because we can't just rely on the big structural, plans and the what shall I call it, from the government, the legislation.
Yes.
That's the word I'm actually a politics major, and I'm I'm legislation.
Classic.
My goodness. Yeah. So, and with that said, by the way, being a politics major and all that, because I just threw that in there. But I was so curious about how governments formed. When I took up political science as a major when I was at Rhodes, I wanted to know, how does this stuff work? Who decides who's going to govern? You know,
Mm.
and I found it to be, what? Yeah, let's just say that I was partly satisfied that this is how it works, but I wanted to know why. It's the why that has always driven me to seek the
Yeah.
answers in life, and to not be satisfied with just being told, well, this is how it is. But I want to know why. Why is it that way? Why is it that um, in South Africa, for example, we've never had a female president? Why? Why? And it's these things that you grapple with over time, and then you realize, oh, there are other people asking the same questions as
Mm.
me, not just you. So I think that should also open, your heart, so you can breathe easy as well, realizing, oh, this is not your burden to bear. You are navigating this at a time when so many other people in the world, and perhaps, not even perhaps, I'm sure of this, that there are other white people in the world, as yourself was saying, I haven't got a clue where to begin. Where do we start? And those conversations, I'm sure, are happening, and there are probably people who are saying, let's start here. But I would encourage that, that idiomatic expression that says nothing for us without us. That was started, I believe, by an organization that serves people with physical challenges or disabilities. So if we must restrain ourselves from having that savior mentality once again. Nothing for us without us. So people must not try and come up with solutions and impose them
Yeah,
on,
agreed completely.
this is what we think is going to work for them. No, no, no. We need to be part of this conversation, and we are not seeking permission. It's how it should be. It's simply how it should be. Human beings should be able to interact and engage as equals. As equals. Before you know that I went to such and such a school or held such positions at such companies, as a human being, I must be able to meet you face to face and feel like I hold the same value that you do, that we're on the same scale. Yeah, so I don't think you should be so overwhelmed, but also it's also challenging for me too. I also seek answers from people that have walked the journey of questioning and seeking prior to me. There's a generation of Black women that we often glean from. Yes, a lot of them are in the diaspora when it comes to the material available online that we can access, but also in South Africa, there's there's a huge pool of women that we from time to time rely on to tell us about our blackness, to be able to articulate these things, because sometimes these conversations can fly over your head because the terminology that is used, and everybody wants, not everybody, but I find that the philosophical terminology and the too much of I don't know, being too politicized at times, and therefore bypassing the heart. I'm going back to the
Yeah.
heart on this to see it has to go to the heart, and that's so important. That's so important. But of course, we can't leave the structural, adjustments out of it, because people still need to feel recognized in the workplace. People still need to be represented, and that's what gets us to at least getting the process going, which has been for quite a number of years now in this country. We must now be seeking a different conversation as well, which must be a parallel, actually not even a parallel. It must be integral as part of
Yeah.
that conversation. Is their heart in this? And
Sure.
that's how I
Yeah.
think we're addressing it.
Unathi, again, this is very unusual for me to be like without words, because I usually get overly excited. But I just I just really want to honor you for being a sounding board for me, and not just on what we're speaking about here, about life and about compassion, about dealing with other humans. This is what you've represented for me, and this is who you are for me. And I'm deeply grateful for that. And how you've shown up today is, it honors that, and it also is it's fully human. You've spoken really beautifully about empathy. You've also spoken about, I even sensed at one point that, well, you even spoke to it around, like, don't put so much on your shoulders, but just start the journey. And I think my takeout for this is really, firstly, it's gratitude. That's something new that is really growing massively in my life. It's gratitude for having had my experience with you for 2.5, 3 years at People Living with Cancer. It's for the conversations that we had, but today it's around looking at things differently and asking a question around something that scares me, which is tricky, and it's very much outside of my comfort zone, because a lot's been said, and a few people and psychologists have actually warned me not having this conversation right now because it's so topical. But I believe that we've done it justice in the heart, and I feel like I've learned a lot around, that community, and expanding that community. For me, that's a massive one, around getting out of my comfort zone, around who I hang around with, who I follow, and things like that. So I'd really want to honor you, and I'd love to invite you to just whatever's on your heart right now, because I just feel like, that's the most important thing that we can talk through, and you do that. And this is, again, why I wanted to have this conversation with you. So if there's anything that you would like to kind of speak into around that's on your heart, to close this and to make it whole.
All right. But no, thank you. Firstly, thank you to you for the invitation. I remember that when we chatted at first, I had notes because I anticipated that this would go in another direction, and then we both said, okay, throw that out the window, because this is what needs to be on the table. And I really feel like, as much as it is a very sensitive topic at this time, it's one that's worthy of being had, and also because we're having it in a space where we can be vulnerable to each other. And I think vulnerability is such a huge thing for me, because it's a strength. Although one could view it as a weakness, it's actually a strength, because not many people venture into that territory because it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. So to be able to go there together in this time, I really, really appreciate it so much. And for you providing this platform, and with your heart as well, which you've always worn on your sleeve. I love the fact that in the time that I knew you and got to interact with you for over 2 years at PLWC, while serving the cancer community, and just dealing with a lot of survivors, including yourself. Not only did I learn about resilience, which is something that I know, it's who you are. You are resilience, and beyond that, though, you are your heart as a human being is really something to marvel at, Brett. And I hope that you'll continue to introspect as you do, and to not be afraid or shy away from these conversations or spaces. And maybe you can have more beyond this one now, even if it's not with somebody who is of a different hue, but just these conversations in your own circles now and going forward. And I will also do the same. It's something that I've been doing for years. Actually, I find that I don't have the what shall I call it, the etiquette when it comes to, okay, now this is the time to speak about race. I find the opportunity anywhere. I find the opportunity anywhere, because I always think to myself, do I want to be, a human being who is constantly living in fear and asphyxiated because I can't speak to somebody about this particular thing and I can speak about anything else with them? That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to have friendships where this is one thing that it's like, let's not go there. Then what is that? Is it a friendship? Is it, and I love having these conversations, and I've enjoyed having this one with you. And I've learned a lot as well from your own, from your honesty and your openness for it, because it's impossible to have a dialogue like this in a fulfilling manner and truthfully if the intention is not to be open and honest.
Sure.
If it's something other than that, we might as well just leave it alone and leave it to people who will do it justice. But I do hope that by having this conversation for both of us, that it will, even if it just means that it results in other conversations beyond this one, maybe for viewers and beyond, because I'm ultimately a conversation starter. I used to blog at some point, and then I just, I got derailed by life. But I like to do this. This is something I like to do, unpacking subject matters that can be tricky and people find to be scary, because I always go in with my heart. I will bring my head along, of course, but I always take my heart with me, because I think this is where we connect the most as human beings. And thank you for allowing me to do that today. I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Unathi. Thank you greatly, Unathi Kapa, for the compassionate, real conversation. This is certainly something that I've got a lot of, I suppose, awareness to open to around not only racism, but the prejudices that sit within our social structures and our business systems and every single aspect of our lives. And the more I find that I start to open myself up to other people's stories, the more that I'm humbled, saddened, and ultimately, I'm not talking about their stories, but a sense of relief in facing that discomfort, in having that conversation, in extending my boundaries or extending my comfort zone, or extending myself outside of my comfort zone, should I say. So as this relates to fierce compassion, I find the more that I start to stretch myself into areas that I am uncomfortable in, and have these sort of conversations, the more relief I get afterwards, because it's essentially me speaking into things that I have held quiet for too long. So I do find that the link between having these sorts of conversations and improving actual physical well-being, if you look at the work that I do in Fierce Compassion, you'll see the dots on how they connect. That we can be kinder to ourselves with less hate, with less fear, with less prejudice. And the more that we connect with our hearts, which was a massive focus of this podcast, and into seeing one another, the more the community, which is a huge pillar in well-being and a huge effect on our physical health, the more that we build and expand that community, the more we're able to probably come up with better solutions on this planet. So I would like to thank you again for your ears, for listening in this time where so much information is being created and pushed at us. So thank you very much for choosing my podcast. Thanks for listening to this conversation. And if you're interested in looking at or understanding more about Unathi and her viewpoints, I would just go into Facebook and type in Unathi K blog, and you'll be able to track all her writing and everything else that she might be impassioned to express. And for me, if you're looking for resilience in the mind, emotions, the spiritual, or the physical, please take a look at my website, www.brettwsimpson.com. You can find me on Facebook, Brett W. Simpson, on Twitter, @BrettWSimpson, and on Instagram, Brett W. Simpson. If you're interested in becoming a client or understanding a little bit more about my 21-day Fierce Compassion program, please contact me directly through my website. Thank you for listening again, and have yourself a fantastic day.